Let's look at Ukraine. Ukraine's president has called on the West not to create panic amid the build-up of Russian troops on his country's borders. He told reporters that warnings of an imminent invasion were putting Ukraine's economy at risk. Yesterday, President Biden said he believed Russia could attack its neighbour next month. Meanwhile, the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, has spoken out for the first time since the United States rejected his demand for Ukraine to be ruled out from joining NATO. Speaking to the French president, Emmanuel Macron, Mr. Putin said the West had ignored Russia's security concerns. He said he would study America's counter-proposals closely before deciding on further action. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis, an American foreign policy analyst with defence priorities, is with us tonight. Daniel, good evening.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Well, explain to me some of the basics around this, Daniel. Why is Russia so adamant to restrict Ukraine from NATO? Why is that top of their agenda?
We've actually known, for 30 years that NATO membership for Ukraine is something that was nearly impossible to pull off. And because it is so hard, almost impossible, I would say, for NATO to defend because of the 1,200-mile border between Ukraine and Russia. And Russia has been clear from the very beginning. I'm talking all the way back to 1994, where Yeltsin was saying, hey, no, this is a bad idea. We do not want NATO to come up near our border. In 2008, Putin then reiterated it, directly saying that a red line was for NATO expansion into Ukraine now, and also into Georgia at that time. He made good on his concerns and on his threats in 2008 by having limited military incursion into Georgia. And then he took a couple of small provinces where Russian-speaking people were living, which effectively pulled Georgia out of the conversation. Now then, in 2014, he seized the Crimea, which was Ukrainian territory, and he expressly said afterwards that this was to keep NATO from advancing. The fact that all those years we still don't listen to them and we're still pushing further and further into their red lines right up to their border, I think they have finally said, look, that's just it. We're not going to be pushed around anymore. We're not going to accept this. And it appears that they're willing to use force to keep it that way. We should never have even pushed this because it's not in our interest to have Ukraine in NATO. That's the bottom line.
So why didn't, when you're talking about we, of course, why didn't we read the room? Why didn't we foresee the problems here?
That is a great way to put it, and the absolute right thing. And what I would ask, really, the capitals of whether it's Washington and Brussels or any of these other Western European countries in NATO, why didn't you guys look at the obvious? And I think the answer is because we could. So, all 4 rounds, Russia protested all 4 rounds, and we just pushed them aside and said, yeah, whatever, we're going to do whatever we want to, and no one can tell us we can't do it. And especially up in 2004, when the 3 Baltic nations joined NATO, Russia wanted to do something, but they were militarily powerless to do it. They just couldn't do it then. But 4 years later, they at least got the minimal capacity. And from 2008 forward, they underwent a massive military reform and reorganization and modernization push. And now then, they can do something about it. Now, we should have been reading the room all the time. We should never have talked about extending NATO expansion to Ukraine because that's not in our interest. Even the Baltics, frankly, militarily, are very difficult for us to defend if Russia should move in that direction. I don't think they will. They're not looking to right now. But if they did, it would be a hard slog for us to defend them. But Ukraine, there's almost no way. So we shouldn't be doing this. But we are now risking war with Russia, and the people of Ukraine, frankly, are the ones who are going to pay for this if we keep stubbornly saying we're still going to not take NATO membership off the table for Ukraine. And that is my big concern right now, is that the people of Ukraine are going to be the ones who pay for this if we don't adopt a policy that makes some sense.
But whether there should have been better strategizing before we got here, we are where we are now. Can these superpowers, the likes of the Americans, be seen to be dictated to by Putin?
Yeah, and that's really the big problem that's right now that's keeping them from making these assessments. I mean, you've seen today the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Secretary of Defense both basically said, yeah, Russia can do whatever they want to do militarily. They can take it if they want to. They recognize it now, but the problem is it appears to be political that, Biden would just be excoriated as being a weak leader and Neville Chamberlain and all that they always roll out every time anybody doesn't choose war. And I think that he's trying to figure a way to not look weak, but also not get into war. And unfortunately, I think trying to thread the needle is just going to end up in war. What we need to do is have a strong leadership and say, hey, we shouldn't have ever gone this far, but now that we are where we are, as you say, and this is what we have to do to prevent war.
If NATO's extension to the Ukraine was taken off the table, what's the downsides to that compared to war?
Well, now I will put a caveat in there. It's possible that it's too late for that move because it's possible that Putin has already set in motion everything. He has an internal timetable we don't know about. And he may say, even if you gave in on that one point now, we're going to go. And the reason I say that is because one of the things they were saying, Lavrov and some others today, is that they reiterated three of their points that they're looking for an answer to. One of which was Ukraine, of course, joining NATO. But the second one was that he wanted us to roll back NATO to the 1997 line. And of course, that's never going to happen. There's no chance for that. And it appears then that if we don't do that, he may say, well, then that's it. We're going to have a conflict. But I guess the direct answer to your question, what we should have done so that we could have this potential of not having war and not having Ukraine in there. Look, here's the bottom line. That means that Ukraine remains free. They don't get attacked by Russia. And there's actually a buffer between Russia and NATO. That's actually good for everybody. But it just doesn't look to me like that we're going to take what's the wisest thing on the table right now.
If there is war, give us a sense of what that war will look like in terms of its size, in terms of people losing their lives.
Yeah, I think that just my assessment of looking at the forces that are arrayed, never in my lifetime has Russia mobilized this much combat power. And I mean, it's across the board. It's the missile forces, air forces, naval forces. 140 ships have left port for various locations and destinations around both the United States and around the waters around some NATO countries. And then, of course, there's this significant combat power on the ground power that's at multiple points where they can have multiple entries. If this comes to war, my opinion is that Russia will go big. They won't just have some small demonstration. It won't be something small like in Georgia. I think they'll come in heavy, hard, and fast to try to win a quick war. And I think that they'll probably the least what they would do is try to take the areas of Luhansk and Donetsk, where they already have very friendly populations that want them to come. And it's possible, though, that they may go further, like up to the Dnieper River, and maybe even near to Kiev. I doubt that they would take Kiev. I think they would leave that out. But it's possible that they may. So in that case, it could be just catastrophic for the Ukrainian armed forces. I mean, I'm talking tens of thousands killed.
And Daniel, what happens after the war when Russia achieves what it wants to? What happens to our relationships with Russia after it? How are they put back together again?
Yeah, that's. I mean, the best case scenario is it's going to be a long, long time. It's going to be many years. I think you're going to see an even greater deepening of the relationship between Russia and China. I think that you're going to see, more and more people in the West wanting to say, hey, we need to increase defense spending and basically, supercharge a Cold War, because now certainly nobody in Eastern Europe is going to believe that Russia is satisfied with parts of Ukraine. They'll feel like they're next. And I mean, I can say I don't think that he would, but it's not. If you're living on the front line and Russia has invaded in the past, you can see where they would say, yeah, we're not going to risk that. So now you've got a new Cold War. And anytime you keep building up forces on both sides, then the possibility for a new war in the future certainly can't be ruled out. And of course, you're talking the potential for nuclear weapons. That is why this is so important to pull back now before we get to those kinds of second and third order effects.
Retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis. Thank you very much indeed, sir.